it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. A Concise Guide to Surviving the Cursed Woods by Scare in a Box. There are 2 rules you must always adhere to in order to survive in this forest. 1. Never get into a situation where there's no light. 2. Only the sunlight can be trusted. That was what the legends said when they spoke of the infamous Umbra Woods. I tried doing some research before my trip, but I couldn't find much information other than those 2 rules that seemed to crop up no matter what forum or website I visited. I wasn't entirely sure what the second one meant, but it seemed to be important that I didn't find myself in darkness during my trip, so I packed 2 flashlights with extra batteries, just to be on the safe side. I already had the right gear for camping in the woods at night, since this was far from my first excursion into strange, unsettling places. I followed legends and curses like threads, eager to test for myself if the stories were true or nothing more than complex, fabricated lies. The Umbra Woods had all manner of strange tales whispered about it, but the general consensus was that the forest was cursed, and those who found themselves beneath the twisted canopy at night met with eerie, unsettling sights and unfortunate ends. A string of people had already disappeared in the forest, but that was the same with any location I visited. Where was the fun without the danger? I entered the woods by the light of dawn. It was early spring, and there was still a chill in the air, the leaves and grass wet with dew, and light mist clinging to the trees. The forest seemed undisturbed at this time, not fully awake. Cobwebs stretched between branches, glimmering like silver thread beneath the sunlight, and the leaves were still. It was surprisingly peaceful, if a little too quiet. I'd barely made it a few steps into the forest when I heard footsteps snaking through the grass behind me. I turned around and saw a young couple entering the woods after me, clad in hiking gear and toting large rucksacks on their backs. They saw me, and the man lifted his hand in a polite wave. "Yeah, you here to investigate the Umbra Woods too?" he asked, scratching a hand through his dark stubble. I nodded, the jagged branches of a tree pressing into my back. "I like to chase mysteries," I supplied in lieu of explanation. "Well, the forest is indeed very mysterious," the woman said, her blue eyes sparkling like gems. "What do you think we'll find here?" I shrugged. I wasn't looking for anything here. I just wanted to experience the woods for myself, so that I might better understand the rumors they whispered about. "Why don't we walk together for a while?" the woman suggested, and since I didn't have a reason not to, I agreed. We kept the conversation light as we walked, concentrating on the movement of the woods around us. I wasn't sure what the wildlife was like here, but I caught snatches of movement amongst the undergrowth while walking. I had yet to glimpse anything more than scurrying shadows, though. The light waned a little in the darker, thicker areas of the forest, but never faded and never consigned us to darkness. In some places, where the canopy was sparse and the grey sunlight poured through, the grass was tall and lush. Other places were bogged down with leaf rot and mud, making it harder to traverse. At midday, we stopped for lunch. Like me, the couple had brought canteens of water and a variety of energy bars and trail mix to snack on. I retrieved a granola bar from my rucksack and chewed on it while listening to the tree bark creak in the wind. When I was finished, I dusted the crumbs off my fingers and watched the leaves at my feet start trembling as things crept out to retrieve what I dropped, dragging them back down into the earth. I took a swig of water from my flask and put it away again. I brought enough supplies to last a few days, though I only intended on staying one night. But places like these could become disorienting and difficult to leave sometimes, trapping you in a cage of old, rotten bark and skeletal leaves. "I left nothing behind," the man said, checking his surroundings before nodding. "Right, let's get going then." I did the same, making sure I hadn't left anything that didn't belong here, then trailed after them, batting aside twigs and branches that reached towards me across the path. Something grabbed my foot as I was walking, and I looked down, my heart lurching at what it might be. An old root had gotten twisted around my ankle somehow, spidery green veins snaking along my shoes. Well, I shook it off, now being extra vigilant of where I was putting my feet. I didn't want to fall into another trap or hurt my foot by stepping somewhere I shouldn't. "We're going to go a bit further and then make camp," the woman told me over her shoulder, quickly looking forward again when she stumbled. We'd yet to come across another person in the forest. While it was nice to have some company, I'd probably separate from them when they set up camp. I wasn't ready to stop yet. Oh, I wanted to go deeper still. A small clearing parted the trees ahead of us, an open area of grass and moss, with a small darkened patch of ground in the middle from a previous campfire. Nearby I heard the soft trickle of water running across the ground. A stream? "Here looks like a good place to stop," the man observed, peering around and testing the ground with his shoe, and the woman agreed. I'll be heading off now," I told them, hoisting my rucksack as it began to slip down off my shoulder. "Be careful out there," the woman warned, and I nodded, thanking them for their company and wishing them well. It was strange walking on my own after that. Listening to my own footsteps crunching through leaves sounded lonely. I almost felt like my presence was disturbing something it shouldn't. I tried not to let those thoughts bother me, glancing around at the trees and watching the sun move across the sky between the canopy. The time on my cell phone read 3:19, so there were still several hours before nightfall. I'd planned on seeing how things went before deciding whether to stay overnight or leave before dusk. But since nothing much had happened yet, I was determined to keep going. I paused a few more times to drink from my canteen and snack on some berries and nuts, keeping my energy up. During one of my breaks, the tree on my left began to tremble, something moving between the sloping boughs. I stood still and waited for it to reveal itself, the frantic rustling drawing closer, until a small bird appeared that I'd never seen before, with black-tipped wings that seemed to shimmer with a dark blue fluorescence and milky white eyes. Something about the bird reminded me of the sky at night, and I wondered what kind of species it was. As soon as it caught sight of me, it darted away, chirping softly. I thought about sprinkling some nuts around me to coax it back, but I decided against it. Didn't want to attract any different or more unsavory creatures. If there were birds here I'd never seen before, then who knew what else called the Umbra Woods their home? Gradually daylight started to wane, and the forest grew dimmer and livelier at the same time. Shadows rustled through the leaves and the soil shifted beneath my feet, like things were getting ready to surface. It grew darker beneath the canopy, gloom coalescing between the trees, and although I could still see fine, I decided to recheck my equipment. Pausing by a fallen log, I set down my bag and rifled through it for one of the flashlights. When I switched it on, it spat out a quiet, skittering burst of light, and then went dark. I frowned and tried flipping it off and on again, but it didn't work. I whacked it a few times against my palm, jostling the batteries inside, but that did nothing either. Odd. I grabbed the second flashlight and switched it on, but it did the same thing. The light died almost immediately. I'd put new batteries in that same morning, fresh from the packet, no cast-offs or half-drained ones. I'd even tried them in the village on the edge of the forest, just to make sure, and they'd been working fine then. How'd they run out of power already? Grumbling in annoyance, I dug the spare batteries out of my pack and replaced them inside both flashlights. I held my breath as I flicked on the switch, a sinking dread settling in the pit of my stomach when they still didn't work. Both of them were completely dead. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't go wandering through the forest in darkness. The rules have been very explicit about not letting yourself get trapped with no light. I knew I should have turned back at that point, but I decided to stay. I had other ways of generating light. A fire would keep the shadows at bay, and when I checked my cell phone, the screen produced a faint glow, though it remained dim. At least the battery hadn't completely drained, like in the flashlights. Though out here with no service, I doubted it would be very useful in any kind of situation. I walked for a little longer, but stopped when the darkness started to grow around me. Dusk was gathering rapidly, the last remnants of sunlight peeking through the canopy. I should stop and get a fire going before I found myself lost in the shadows. I backtracked to an empty patch of ground that I'd passed, where the canopy was open and there was no overhanging branches or thick undergrowth, and started building my fire, stacking pieces of kindling and tinder in a small circle. Then I pulled out a match and struck it, holding the bright flame to the wood and watching it ignite, spreading further into the fire pit. With a soft, pleasant crackle, the fire burned brighter, and I let out a sigh of relief. At least now I had something to ward off the darkness. But as the fire continued to burn, I noticed there was something strange about it, something that didn't make any sense. Despite all the flickering and snaking of the flames, there were no shadows cast in its vicinity. The fire burned almost as a separate entity, touching nothing around it. As dusk fell and the darkness grew, it only became more apparent. The fire wasn't illuminating anything. I held my hand in front of it, feeling the heat lick my palms, but the light didn't spread across my skin. Was that what was meant by the second rule? Light had no effect in the forest unless it came from the sun. I watched a bug flit too close to the flames, buzzing quietly. An ember spat out of the mouth of the fire and incinerated it in the fraction of a second, leaving nothing behind. Oh, what was I supposed to do? If the fire didn't emit any light, did that mean I was in danger? The rumors never said what would happen if I found myself alone in the darkness, but the number of people who had gone missing in this forest was enough to make me cautious. I didn't want to end up as just another statistic. I had to get somewhere with light, real light, before it got full dark. I was too far from the exit simply to run for it. It was safer to stay where I was. Only the sunlight can be trusted. I lifted my gaze to the sky, clear between the canopy. The sun had already set long ago, but the pale crescent of the moon glimmered through the trees. If the surface of the moon was simply a reflection of the sun, did it count as sunlight? Well, I had no choice at this point. I had to hope that the reasoning was sound. The fire started to die out fairly quickly once I stopped feeding it kindling. While it fended off the chill of the night, it did nothing to hold the darkness back. I could feel it creeping around me, getting closer and closer. If it wasn't for the strands of thin, silvery moonlight that crept down onto the forest floor and basked my skin in a faint glow, I'd be in complete darkness. As long as the moon kept shining on me, I should be fine. But as the night drew on and the sky dimmed further, the canopy itself seemed to thicken, as if the branches were threading closer together, blocking out more and more of the moon's glow. If this continued, I'd no longer be in the night. The fire had shrunk to a faint flicker now, so I let it burn out on its own, a chill settling over my skin as soon as I got to my feet. I had to go where the moonlight could reach me, which meant my only option was going up. If I could find a nice nook above the tree line, I should be in direct contact with the moonlight for the rest of the night. Hoisting my bag onto my shoulders, I walked up to the nearest tree and tested the closest branch with my hand. It seemed sturdy enough to hold my weight while I climbed. Taking a deep breath of the cool night air, I pulled myself up, my shoes scrabbling against the bark in search of a proper foothold. Part of the tree was slippery with sap and moss, and I almost slipped a few times, the branches creaking sharply as I balanced all of my weight onto them, but I managed to right myself. Some of the smaller twigs scraped over my skin and tangled in my hair as I climbed, my backpack thumping against the small of my back. The tree seemed to stretch on forever, and just when I thought I was getting close to its crown, I'd look up and find more branches above my head, as if the tree had sprouted more when I wasn't looking. Finally, my head broke through the last layer of leaves. I could finally breathe now that I was free from the cloying atmosphere between the branches. I brushed pieces of dry bark off my face and looked around for somewhere to sit. The moonlight danced along the leaves, illuminating a deep groove inside the tree, just big enough for me to comfortably sit. My legs ached from the exertion of climbing, and although the bark was lumpy and uncomfortable, I was relieved to sit down. The bone-white moon gazed down on me, washing the shadows from my skin. As long as I stayed above the tree line, I should be able to get through the night. It was rather peaceful up here. Felt like I might reach up and touch the stars if I wanted to, their soft twinkling lights dotting the velvet sky like diamonds. A wind began to rustle through the leaves, carrying a breath of frost, and I wished I could have stayed down by the fire. Would the chill get me before the darkness could? I wrapped my jacket tighter around my shoulders, breathing into my hands to keep them warm. I tried to check my phone for the time, but the screen had dimmed so much I couldn't see a thing. It was useless. With a sigh, I put it away and nestled deeper into the tree, tucking my hands beneath my armpits to stay warm. Above me, the moon shone brightly, making the treetops glow silver. I started to doze, lulled into a dreamy state by the smiling moon and the rustling breeze. Just as I was on the precipice of sleep, something at the back of my mind tugged me awake. A feeling, perhaps an instinctual warning that something was going to happen. I lifted my gaze to the sky and gave a start. A thick wisp of cloud was about to pass over the moon. If it blocked the light completely, would I be trapped in darkness? "Oh, please change your direction," I shouted, my sudden loudness startling a bird from the tree next to me. Perhaps I was simply imagining it in a sleep-induced haze, but the cloud stopped moving, only the very edge creeping across the moon. I blinked. Had the cloud heard me? And then, in a tenuous, whispering voice, the cloud replied, "Play with me, then. Hide and seek." I watched in a mixture of amazement and bewilderment as the cloud began to drift downwards towards the forest in a breezy, elegant motion. It passed between the trees, leaving glistening wet leaves in its wake, then disappeared. I stared after it, my heart thumping hard in my chest. The cloud really had just spoken to me. But despite its wish to play hide and seek, I had no intention of leaving my treetop perch. Up here, I knew I was safe in the moonlight. At least now the sky had gone clear again. No more clouds threatening to sully the glow of the moon. As long as the sky stayed empty and the moon stayed bright, I should make it until morning. I didn't know what time it was, but several hours must have passed since dusk had fallen. I started to feel sleepy, but the cloud's antics had put me on edge, and I was worried something else might happen if I closed my eyes again. What if the cloud came back when it realized I wasn't actually searching for it? It was a big forest, so there was no guarantee I'd even manage to find it. Hopefully the cloud stayed hidden and wouldn't come back to threaten my safety again. I fought the growing heaviness in my eyes, the wind gently playing with my hair. After a while, I could no longer fight it and started to doze off, nestled by the creaking bark and soft leaves. I awoke sometime later, in near darkness. Panic tightened in my chest as I sat up, realizing the sky above me was empty. Where was the moon? I spied its faint silvery glow on the horizon, just starting to dip out of sight. But dawn was still a while away, and without the moon, I would have no viable light source. "Where are you going?" I called after the moon, not completely surprised when it answered me back. Its voice was soft and lyrical, like a lullaby, but its words filled me with a sinking dread. "Today I'm only working half, period. Sorry." I stared in rising fear as the moon slipped over the edge of the horizon, the sky an impossibly dark expanse above me. Was this it? Was I finally going to be swallowed by the shadowy forest? My eyes narrowed closed, my heart thumping hard in my chest. What was going to happen now that I was surrounded by darkness? Until I noticed, through my slitted gaze, soft pinpricks of orange light surrounding me. My eyes flew open, and I sat up with a gasp, gazing at the glowing creatures floating between the branches around me. Fireflies. Their glimmering lights could also hold the darkness at bay. A tear welled in the corner of my eye and slid down my cheek in relief. "You came to save me," I murmured, watching the little insects flutter around me, their lights fluctuating in an unknown rhythm. A quiet chirping voice spoke close to my ear, soft wings brushing past my cheek. "We can share our lights with you until morning." My eyes widened and I stared at the bug hopefully. "You will?" The firefly bobbed up and down at the edge of my vision. "Yes, we charge by the hour." I blinked. I had to pay them. Did fireflies even need money? As if sensing my hesitation, the firefly squeaked. "Your friends down there refused to pay and ended up drowning to their deaths." My friends? Did they mean the couple I'd been walking with earlier that morning? I felt a pang of guilt that they hadn't made it, but I was sure they knew the risks of visiting a forest like this just as much as I did. If they came unprepared or unaware of the rules, this was their fate from the start. "Okay," I said, knowing I didn't have much of a choice. If the fireflies disappeared, I wouldn't survive until morning. This was my last chance to stay in the light. How do I pay you?" The firefly flew past my face and hovered by the tree trunk, illuminating a small slot inside the bark, like the card slot at an ATM machine. Well, at least they accepted card. I had no cash on me at all. I dug through my rucksack and retrieved my credit card, hesitantly sliding it into the gap. Would putting it inside the tree really work? But then I saw a faint glow inside the trunk and an automated voice spoke from within. "Your card was charged $. "Wait, how much was it charging?" "Leave your card in there," the firefly instructed, "and we'll stay for as long as you pay us." Okay, I said. I guess I really did have no choice. With the moon having already abandoned me, I had nothing else to rely on but these little lightning bugs to keep the darkness from swallowing me. The fireflies were fun to watch as they fluttered around me, their glowing lanterns spreading a warm, cozy glow across the treetop I was resting in. I dozed a little bit, but every hour the automated voice inside the tree would wake me up with its alert. "Your card was charged $. At least now I was able to keep track of how much time was passing. Several hours passed and the sky remained dark while the fireflies fluttered around, sometimes landing on my arms and warming my skin, sometimes murmuring in voices I couldn't quite hear. It lent an almost dreamlike quality to everything, and sometimes I wouldn't be sure if I was asleep or awake until I heard the voice again, reminding me that I was paying to stay alive every hour. More time passed, and I was starting to wonder if the night was ever going to end. I'd lost track of how many times my card had been charged, and my stomach started to growl in hunger. I reached for another granola bar, munching on it while the quiet night pressed around me. Then, from within the tree, the voice spoke again. This time the message was different. "There are not enough funds on this card. Please try another one." I jolted up in alarm, spraying granola crumbs into the branches as the tree spat my used credit card out. "What? I don't have another card. What was I supposed to do now?" I turned to the fireflies, but they were already starting to disperse. Wait! "Bye-bye," the firefly squeaked, before they all scattered, leaving me alone. "Oh, you mercenary flies," I shouted angrily after them, sinking back into despair. What now? Just as I was trying to consider my options, a streaky grey light cut through the treetops. When I lifted my gaze to the horizon, I glimpsed the faint shimmer of the sun just beginning to rise. Dawn was finally here. I waited up in the tree as the sun gradually rose, chasing away the chill of the night. I'd made it. I'd survived. When the entire forest was bathed in its golden sparkling light, I finally climbed down from the tree. I was a little sluggish and tired, and my muscles were cramped from sitting in a nook of bark all night, and I slipped a few times on the dewy branches, but I finally made it back onto solid, leafy ground. The remains of my fire had gone cold and dry, the only trace I was ever here. Checking I had everything with me, I started back through the woods, trying to retrace my path. A few broken twigs and half-buried footprints were all I had to go on. but it was enough to assure me I was heading the right way. The forest was as it had been the morning before, quiet and sleepy, not a trace of life. It made my footfalls sound impossibly loud, every snapping branch and crunching leaf echoing for miles around me. It made me feel like I was the only living thing in the entire woods. I kept walking until, through the trees ahead of me, I glimpsed a swathe of dark fabric. A tent. Then I remembered. This must have been where the couple had set up camp. A sliver of regret and sadness wrapped around me. They'd been kind to me yesterday, and it was a shame they hadn't made it through the night. The fireflies hadn't been lying after all. I pushed through the trees and paused in the small clearing, looking around. Everything looked still and untouched. The tent was still zipped closed, as if they were still sleeping soundly inside. Were their bodies still in there? I shuddered at the thought before noticing something odd. The ground around the tent was soaked, puddles of water seeping through the leaf-sodden earth. What was with all the water? Where had it come from? The fireflies had mentioned the couple had drowned. But how had the water gotten here in the first place? Mildly curious, I walked up to the tent and pressed a hand against it. The fabric was heavy and moist, completely saturated with water. When I pressed further, more clear water pumped out of the base, soaking through my shoes and the ground around me. The tent was completely full of water. If I pulled the zip down, it would come flooding out in a tidal wave. And then it struck me. The only possibility as to how the tent had filled with so much water. The cloud. It had descended into the forest, bidding me to play hide and seek with it. Was this where the cloud was hiding, inside the tent? I pulled away and spoke rather loudly. I wonder where that cloud went. Oh, cloud, where are you? I'll find you. The tent began to tremble joyfully, and I heard a stifled giggle from inside. I'm coming, Mr. Cloud. Instead of opening the tent, I began to walk away. I didn't want to risk getting bogged down in the flood, and if I found the cloud, it'd be my turn to hide. Well, the woods were dangerous enough without trying to play games with a bundle of condensed vapor. It was better to leave it where it was. Eventually, it would give up. From the couple's campsite, I kept walking, finding it easier to retrace our path now that there were more footprints and marks to follow. Yesterday's trip through the trees had already felt like a distant memory after everything that had happened between then and now. Well, at least now I knew to be more cautious of the rules when entering strange places. The trees thinned out, and I finally stepped out of the forest, the heavy, cloying atmosphere of the canopy lifting from my shoulders now that there was nothing above me but the clear blue sky. Out of curiosity, I reached into my bag for the flashlights and tested them. Both switched on, as if there'd been nothing wrong with them at all. My cell phone, too, was back to full illumination, the battery still half charged and the service flickering in and out of range. Despite everything, I'd managed to make it through the night. I pulled up the memo app on my phone and checked the Umbra Woods off my to-do list. A slightly more challenging location than I'd envisioned, but nonetheless an experience I would never forget. Now it was time to get some proper sleep. Start preparing for my next location. After all, there were always more mysteries to chase. I went camping with my wife, but now I can't leave the woods. What was supposed to be a nice night in the woods eventually turned into a nightmare. My wife and I were going to set up our tent and have a lovely time there, surrounded by nature. Oh, little did I know, things would take an unexpected turn. I hadn't seen Christine in 2 months, because she'd been contracted to restore some historical buildings in South America, mainly Argentina and Uruguay, so we couldn't have been happier to spend some quality time together. I'm a police officer, and we live in Ely, a small town that's easy to miss in northern Minnesota, near the beautiful Chagawah Lake. We'd started packing, and I was double-checking to see we didn't forget anything. Christine was so excited to go kayaking, She loved doing it on her days off, and she was clearly missing it after all this time away.
"Ethan, I can't wait. Come on, are you done? Let's go already," she said, the rays of the sun reflecting from her blonde hair.
"I missed you so much, Christine," I told her, gently caressing her face. On the way there, we stopped at a decrepit gas station to fuel up and buy some diet chips and soda. Behind the counter, there was this odd-looking guy. He had a big mole on his nose. He was sweating non-stop. The cap on his head was soaked, and he had a twitching eye that was smaller than the other one. On the left side of his face, he had a big burn. It looked like someone had punished him for something bad he'd done by placing a hot iron on his cheek. As we were taking a turn to enter the road leading to the woods, the scenery changed its color from the monotonous asphalt gray of the highway to the enchanting green of the lively forest. It seemed like time was passing in a different fashion here, and the trees looked very old, standing tall the test of time. We arrived just in time to catch a few more hours of daylight and decided to set up camp by the lake. We started unpacking, got our tent into place, and the kayak was ready to go, and Christine was as happy as a kid watching the ice cream truck on a sunny day. We chilled for another half an hour, while listening to the sweet sound of birds singing and waves hitting the shore. After that, we took a small hike, and we reached an open area filled with green grass and tall trees.
"Oh, Ethan, this is fabulous. Look at this place. Oh, the forest looks alive. Let's sit on that mossy ledge over there just for a bit. Then we can go kayaking,"
Christine said, absolutely impressed with this place. She looked like she really needed this trip. "Yeah, honey, this is great. I'm enjoying it so much," I said, inhaling the fresh air of the woods. The lake was perfect for our adventure, so we started paddling and Christine was really enjoying it. But all of a sudden, a sense of dread came over me when I saw some shadows moving behind the trees. I decided to ignore them. They were probably just some animals. We arrived back at camp. It was around 8 p.m, so we had another hour to cook dinner and watch the sunset. Oh, the view over the lake was fantastic. Christine really enjoyed the food, and before we knew it, night had come. We sat outside the tent on a blanket, watching the starry sky. Everything was exactly as it should be. Christine was smiling at me, and we were so happy. We even saw a falling star, so we both wished for something. Then we started making love. Her blue eyes were lit up with desire. Needless to say, it felt really passionate. The mild breeze made the leaves rustle, and our hearts were beating faster than ever. We then fell asleep in a lover's embrace. I woke up in the middle of the night, all sweaty and thirsty. Christine was missing. Scared, I started screaming her name. "Christine, where are you? Chris!" I yelled in desperation, my screams lost in the vastness of the night. Nothing came back. I got dressed quickly, grabbed a flashlight, and went to search for my wife. Now, being a police officer, I never lose my calm in tough situations like these, but now it was really tough, because I love her and she is missing. I ran like crazy for what seemed like hours, but she was nowhere to be found. I didn't know what was going on, so I kept searching and searching. Ultimately, I decided to go back to the tent, just to find it had been ravaged like it had been attacked by some wild beast. "What's happening here? Hey, is someone there? Christine, where are you?" I screamed until my throat was raw. As I was looking around to see if I could find anything, I saw a tree with a wooden pentagram tied to it, and blood dripping. A piece of her nightgown was on the ground. I quickly went to the car to get my gun and start looking for Christine again. I needed to kill whatever was holding her captive. Well, the tires had been slashed, and the windows were broken. Fortunately, the gun was well hidden, and whatever or whoever had thrashed our tent and car didn't manage to get it. I was running low on battery,
so I was really glad to find my extra one lying on the floor. Luckily, it wasn't damaged. Enraged and dejected, I started going through the woods, and every branch seemed to point that I should move forward. The stars above were my only guide as I went deeper, not knowing what I would find. I heard a branch cracking behind me, turned around quickly, but there was no one there. After that, I heard a cry for help.
"Ethan, hurry up. They have me. Please, hurry."
I started following the sound of her voice until I reached an open area in the woods where I found what looked like a church. It was the same area that we'd seen earlier in the day, but how was that possible? Right beside that mossy log, this wooden church appeared. It was painted black, with light coming from inside it, while a thick fog was enshrouding it. It was surrounded by a metallic fence, the front gates open wide, while the hinges were creaking under the light of the moon. The building looked ancient, like it was over 1,000 years old. It seemed not of this world, and more so it looked evil. It looked like a place where nightmares come to life, and pain was its favorite meal. I was watching cautiously from behind the trees and couldn't believe my eyes. Last time I was in this area, there was nothing here, so it must have been built recently, but how and why did it look so old? How was it built so fast? Impossible. Had I been lured here? What was I to find when I snuck in? I decided to approach this building carefully, with small steps. I went to the left side of the building, keeping my grip firm on the gun. I raised my head a little, just to look inside, where I saw some sort of a gathering. I noticed hooded people chanting and raising their hands to the ceiling. They had a live lamb placed on a stone. Their leader approached it and began an incantation.
"Mother Furia, take this offering as a gift from us to you, O unholy goddess of chaos and destruction. Protect us and let us live to do your bidding."
Then she cut its neck open and blood started painting the altar. She then called one of the people in the group, and they both removed the hoods from their heads, and as I looked in despair, not understanding anything at all anymore, I saw my wife talking with the guy from the gas station. I recognized him by the burn on his face. Christine was wearing a crown of branches on her head and some sort of makeup that was dripping down from her face. On her forehead, a half moon was painted with the blood of the lamb. My loving wife began to berate her followers as my heart shattered into a million pieces.
"She wants human sacrifice, and she wants it fast. Her patience is wearing thin. That's why I came here with him. You were supposed to catch him while he was sleeping. Why did you fail? Why?" "I put something in his drink to make him sleep longer. You had one job to do. Take some men with you and go fight him fast. Go now," my wife said, enraged at the utter failure of her men. And then, out of nowhere, I saw my wife floating in midair, like she was possessed by some unknown entity, probably this Furia goddess. Her eyes rolled back and turned white, as she said in an unholy voice, while throwing the dead lamb against a wall, "I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I need to eat. Bring him to me." Then she quickly came back to her senses, as my skin prickled with horror. My time with the Force had taught me to be strong in situations like this, so I kept my composure. I heard a cracking behind me, and as I turned I saw one of the cultists trying to attack me. I blocked him, punched him in the face, and choked him, eventually killing him. Then I dragged the body back to the woods, stole his clothes, so I could dress up like one of them. Oh, my battery's running low. Reception's pretty bad, but, well, I can't make any phone calls from here, so I'm hiding behind a tree, thinking of what I should do next. Now that I can't leave the woods,
I must find out what's happening and who my wife really is. Part 2. Nightmares exist in reality too, and I know it because I'm living in one right now. I've been hiding in a hole under a tree with this dead guy lying beside me, but I managed to keep my composure. It started raining, so I needed to take shelter somewhere. I stole the clothes off of the guy I killed and wanted to go inside and search the church, although I knew it was dangerous. But, well, I had to take my chances. Time stands still here, it seems, because it's been night for the past 24 hours. I saw the trees hunching over the church like they were drawn to it as it started transforming. It seemed alive. It even grew 4 towers, each on every extremity. This is a place of evil, of ill will. I can feel it in my gut. The obsidian towers looked like they were guarding the evil inside, watching carefully for any trespassers. Their goddess was hungry and in need of a sacrifice. Well, I'll sacrifice them all right, I remember thinking to myself. Being a cop has you dealing with tough situations, but not with anything like this. Not when it involves the supernatural. My plan was to take them down one by one, as I only counted 10 hooded figures inside the church. And then, of course, there's my wife. But I didn't want to think of anything of that sort. My Glock's mag had 17 bullets in it, so it should have been enough. I never miss a shot, and I always aim for the head. They were leaving the church. As I saw them splitting into 3 groups, I noticed that one of them was coming towards me. I quickly took the dead guy, who I had dressed in my clothes, and put him on the trail and waited to see if they'd fall for it. They had flashlights, and as they approached, one of them yelled, "There's something lying on the ground." They all came quickly, and as they rotated the body face up, another one said, "Wait, but this is..." They turned as they heard me stepping on a branch while sneaking up behind them, and I slowly whispered, "Hey, you fucks, say goodbye." Like I said, I never miss. 3 headshots. 7 more to go, and I only wished that the last one standing was the guy from the gas station, so I could question and rough him up a bit before putting a bullet in his head. They must have heard the shots, so I decided to go hide under the tree again. And I waited, silently, watching and hearing everything around and above me, as the second group came to see what had happened. "It came from there. Get your gun, Anthony," the voice said as one set of footsteps started running frantically. I heard a door creaking open and then closing. I let them pass me, and then I slowly emerged from under the tree. "I think I saw him run that way," I said while they turned around, and before they even got a chance to see who I was, I dropped them all. Poor Anthony forgot to put bullets inside the chamber, which was a pity. One extra gun would have been useful. Okay, 4 more lunatics to go. I took all the bodies and piled them under the tree, and as I was moving towards the church, I heard a crack to my right, and then a cultist asked me, "Hey, I heard gunshots. Are you alright? Did you find him?" "She's starting to get impatient. She needs food, otherwise she can't leave the black church," he said to me, fear breathing from his mouth. "Yep, I found him. And you're talking to him," I replied while turning to face him, and noticing that there were 2 of them standing one next to the other. "Don't make a move. This thing is loaded." As they both collapsed to the ground, I heard another one yelling behind me, and as I turned, he hit me in the stomach with a baseball bat. An immense wave of pain passed through me, and I fell to the ground. I saw the guy getting ready to hit me once more, but I avoided the bat as he hit the soil beside me. I drew my gun and put 3 bullets in his chest. As I looked at his face, I saw that this was not the guy from the gas station. Blood started staining his clothes. He was gasping for what was the last breath of his life. I wanted to find gas station guy quickly before entering the church. I decided to take another look around, and I saw that a shack had appeared just a few feet away from me. I went inside only to find dead rabbits, hogs, birds, snakes, and other small insects lying on a wooden table. The walls were filled with sickles, machetes, and very sharp knives. They were probably using them for hunting and gutting the animals. And probably they would have done the same to me if they caught me sleeping. I heard someone coming, but before I could reach my gun, I heard him say, "You killed them, but you forgot about me. Take your gun from the holster and place it on the ground, then turn towards me slowly." The man said, "Well, I finally had him where I wanted." "All right, take it slow. You got me. Look, I'm putting it down," I said as I was checking the table for a sharp knife I could use to slit his throat. As I turned around, I could see that his face was now burned on the right side as well. "Damn, you're one ugly son of a bitch," I said again, making fun of him. I wanted him to lose his nerve, so I could attack him. Mother shot me in the shoulder, and I yelled in pain as I saw him grinning from his yellow, ugly teeth. "You bastard! Why did you do that?" I asked him again, the pain becoming unbearable, and the blood would not stop flowing. "I got this second burn because of you, you son of a bitch. Because you didn't stay asleep so we could get you. Mother Furia punished me. She always punishes us when we fail a task. But I'll be fine. You, on the other hand, you won't be. Just wait until she finds out you killed all her followers. Oh boy. At least she'll be well fed. She'll decorate the walls of her church with your blood," the burnt guy said, still pointing the gun at me, not entirely sure if he'd pop another bullet in me. I then asked him about my wife, and he told me that she's been Furia's devoted follower since her childhood. All the women in her family were. "Things were going pretty good up until I decided to start this fuss," he said. "She ate men from Christine's family, as she did with her father, grandfather, and probably that's how she survives. It's a sacrifice they have to make. It's been like this for hundreds of years. When there's no more men to eat from one family, Furia takes the form of the last leader, moves on to find another one, and then another one, and so on. I was the last man in my family, and so I had to stop her. If not, she'd go on and destroy another family, and she'd be doing this forever. I have to kill this guy, and then Christine, well, if Furia doesn't kill me first." A strong wind came howling in the shack, and as the man turned, I took my chance and severed his hand with a machete. As he started screaming, I slit his throat and watched him die right before my eyes, gurgling on his blood. As his hand landed on the ground, the gun came off, and luckily enough, the bullet flew right by my ear. You'll die a horrible death," he said as he fell to the ground, his blood quickly absorbed by the soil, meaning that Furia was feeding. I took a knife and decided to take the bullet out because it didn't go through. Oh, the pain was excruciating, but I managed to get it cleaned up. I took his gun only to see one bullet remaining, so I got the gunpowder out and cauterized the wound. My survival instinct saved my life. I got my gun and decided to go inside Furia's church. The full moon in the sky became a half-bloody moon, and I figured that meant evil was rising. Silently, I opened a side door, and the view inside was grotesque. The walls were decorated with dead animals, pinned to the walls with nails, as if someone got angry when failing the taxidermy exam. Strange drawings were depicted on the walls, showing a female figure eating the flesh of men and painting her face with their blood. The last part of the ritual showed antlers growing from Furia's temples. She was floating in the air, her eyes all white, and branches were embracing her as blood was dripping down from her mouth. On her forehead, a half-moon was depicted. This means that when I first saw Christine floating in the air, I saw one of Furia's forms, and the thought of seeing her final one chilled me to the bone. I only have 5 more bullets in the chamber. I decided to go and look for her, and I saw a small hatch leading to the basement. I took the stairs down, and at the other end of the room, I saw Christine praying and silently chanting to one of Furia's wooden statues. The final step creaked, and as Christine turned, she saw my face and let out a shriek. She started running towards me, so I quickly went back upstairs, closed the hatch, and now I'm hiding behind a wooden bench. I hear Christine breaking the hatch door. "Ethan, my love, come out, please. I need to eat," she's saying, oblivious of the life we had before. Except, of course, that's not Christine anymore. Part 3. My heart was pounding at that moment, yet somehow I managed to stay lucid amidst all this insanity. I knew then very well what I had to do with her. Christine or Furia needed to be killed. My mind and soul were inundated with pain and sorrow at the thought, because I was absolutely certain that I will never understand what's happened here, nor will I ever receive any sort of explanation. She started screaming my name, obsessively, but I could hear Furia taking over her as Christine's voice was changing, emanating sounds from beyond this plane of existence. Her voice sounded like it was letting out all the agony, despair, and inconsolable grief of all the men she'd devoured throughout time. "Ethan, if you don't come out right this instant, you will suffer a slow and violent death." The distorting sound of her voice filling the room inside the church. "Fine, so be it. I will devour you," she went on, ravenous. I started gnashing my teeth as the wretchedness inside took over what little love I had for the woman who was once my wife. But Christine wasn't there anymore. Furia had taken over her completely, throwing the wooden benches all over the place while searching for me. I tucked the pistol behind my back and got out before she would have gotten to me. "Okay, I'm coming out. I give up. I can't win this fight anyway," I said, trying to stall her a bit and think about my next move. This was a fight for my own life now. It was either her or me. It was survival of the fittest. She was laughing uncontrollably, as if it was the single most ardent pleasure of her life. Her appearance was monstrous. She looked exactly like she was depicted on the walls. Her eyes were all white. Antlers were coming out from her temples. Twigs and branches were embracing her. The half-moon on her forehead was carved into her skin, blood falling down her cheeks and painting them to look like rivers on a map. "There you are, my love. Now I want you to play hard to get with me a little, okay?" she said, probably enjoying the thrill of the hunt and adrenaline rush that you feel when you shoot and kill the prey. Then I noticed the animals on the walls starting freeing themselves and falling down. They came to life and, squirming, they started rising up. Their mutilated bodies, eyes dangling from their sockets and flesh hanging from their bones, were an absolute horror to behold. I squished a possum with my foot, blood and guts sticking on my boot. I then decided to take a piece of loose wooden plank that was sitting behind one of the benches and proceeded to kill them one by one. The last animal standing was a wolf. Its lower jaw was missing, the tongue was dangling in the air, and saliva was dropping on the floor. It charged me, but when it tried to jump, I hit it so hard that I decapitated it. "Oh, Ethan, it's all fun and games, but my hunger is growing stronger. So, come here," she said, floating in the air as she came to me, trying to grab me. I moved to the side and hit her with the plank.
Christine, this is not you. Stop it, please, I said, still trying to cling on to whatever was left inside. Christine is gone forever. Come here. Don't make this harder than it has to be, she yelled. I started running towards the exit, but she placed herself in front of the door. I was trapped, so I had to find something else to escape from there alive. Then, I wanted to go towards the hatch door, but to no avail. She was faster than me. But she was also more and more erratic and enraged. Her hunger was making her do irrational things. She started throwing the benches everywhere. She even raised the dead animals and threw them on me, leaving me covered in animal guts and blood. Then she smacked me so hard, out of nowhere, that she threw me across the room into a wall. I started coughing. My eye was cut and bleeding. She came towards me again. I need to eat. I'm hungry, she said as she grabbed my throat, choking me. Please stop. You're killing me, Christine, I begged as a final plea, hoping maybe, just maybe, things could work out after all and we could go back home to live our happy life together. She then started sinking her teeth into my already damaged shoulder, blood painting her lips a bright shade of red. I watched her with tears in my eyes. Before she could even get to bite my throat and kill me, I slowly took the gun from behind my back and shot her in the stomach. What did you do? She said, coughing up blood and looking at me with teary eyes. Her own blood was mending with mine. You killed me, she said, but now in Christine's voice. As she gave her final breath, I took her lifeless body and placed it on the grass outside the church, and watched her lying there, as if she was finally freed from her demons. There was one more thing that needed to be done. I went back to the shed and took a canister of gas, soaked the church in gasoline and set it ablaze. A purple incandescent flame took over the church, and while it was burning bright, it let out screams of agony. I went back to stay with Christine, looking at the burning church and contemplating my past life, knowing things will never be the same and not knowing if I will fully recover. As the fire was slowly extinguished, I saw the sun rising up in the sky. A brand new day was upon me. I placed the gun under my chin and closed my eyes, contemplating if I should use the last bullet in the chamber. As I was about to pull the trigger, I heard a voice from the distance. Ethan, put it down. It's not worth it, man. Put it down, please. We'll figure this out, the voice said gravely, trying to save me. I opened my eyes and turned to see my colleague and 2 other police officers, pointing their guns at me. As I put the gun down, he said to me, "Good job, Ethan. Can you please run me through what the hell happened here so I can understand why you killed her?" She was running a cult, Jim. I killed them, all 11. One of them's in the shed behind the church, and I stuffed the other ones in a hole under the tree over there, I said, replying to his question as best I could. She was in league with these crazy people, and they tried feeding me to their goddess, I said, realizing that this sounded like utter madness. Ethan, there's no church, and there's no shed, just that dead char guy lying on the ground, he said, looking at me like I was crazy. Did you burn something over there? He asked me, pointing to where the church used to be. It burned down. That's why it's not there. You can only see the ashes, I said to him. It was something evil, Jim. A thing not of this world, and it possessed Christine. Her family's been worshipping this Furia goddess for God knows how many generations. He then gave me a blanket to warm myself, and told me, it's been a tough night, Jim. Thanks for coming. Why'd you come so fast? I asked him with an expressionless face. What do you mean one night, buddy? You've been gone a week. That's why we have the search party here. Come on, let's get you fixed. You're bleeding and you're in shock," he said, trying to be as helpful and respectful as he could be. So that's probably why the sun never came up. I was trapped in some sort of place where time was non-existent, I remember thinking to myself. After they called an ambulance and took the bodies out of the hole, I took them to the camping site and told the whole story from start to finish. I went to the hospital for 3 days and now I'm home, recovering. I've been placed under medical supervision for 60 days, but at least I'll be fine, and I stopped Furia from ever doing harm again. I still miss Christine sometimes, but given that we lived in a house of lice, I'm sure that I'll get on with my life and be happy again one day.
The moon illuminated a patiently waiting figure under the rain. A large, smudged silhouette approached it from the distance. Horses panted as the wooden wheels rolled through the mud. Once close enough, the ornamented wooden carriage came to a halt. 2 mounted lanterns showed the coachman tilting his hat. A tall, well-dressed pale man exited, lifted the figure's luggage, and invited it in. The muffled sound of multiple raindrops landing on the roof made the interior cozy. Dry and sheltered from the cold autumn wind, the tall man sat next to an even paler, middle-aged woman in a beautiful white dress. The figure's visage came clearer as it sat on the opposite side. "You are Lady Hortense, yes?" A blonde woman, pale as both of them, tilted her head. "So I am," the older woman frowned. "And you are Miss Esther. It seems my expectations were too high." She let out a disappointed sigh. "Why would you wear those?" The woman's shirt, trousers and boots emitted a cheap perfume. "No need for the miss, just Esther. Pursuits in fancy dresses end badly." "I understand. But surely you'll change into something more appropriate once we reach the city." "I assure you I will. But I wasn't called here for fashion advice, was I?" Of course, of course." Hortense's condescending frown disappeared. "You heard of the murders?" "The entire kingdom has. My assignment is to slay the killer." "Ah, if only it were that easy. Most of the city's police are after it. Men have volunteered, and each day we hire more of your sort." She glanced at the pale man. "You, Miss Esther, shall serve as one of my personal guards. My estate, my property, my family. The killer is not to come anywhere near. Obey these basic orders, and you shall receive the agreed assets each month." "I received your letter. I've already agreed." I enjoy repeating myself. It prevents misunderstandings." An evil smile creeped on the woman's face. "Welcome." Carriage entered the city. Each building consisted of wood and brick. Their chimneys let out smoke, indicating the population hiding from the cold night. It passed one of the city's larger pubs. Mugs in their hands, 2 men watched the rain from inside. Beside their table, a crowd of people sang, laughed, drank, and ate. Each person in the pub was from the working class. Therefore, they wore similar clothing. "All this has made me think." Ralph, a young man, licked his lips. "How are people this happy? Come to think of it, they were sadder before the murders." His older friend Paul smiled. "I've been around long enough to answer that question." "Compensation." What?" "Compensation. When it's summer, do you light a fire?" "Why would I? The sun'd be burning my head." Paul pointed towards a group of people standing around the fireplace in the middle of the hall. "It's cold now, so we light a fire." "I'm not following." "If the cold wasn't here, would we be together around a fire?" "I get you." "When something bad happens, we want to feel better. Say, if you get stuck in a chimney, you'd want a beer. I'd usually want one anyways, but if I get stuck in a chimney, I'd really want one. Well, when something much worse like murders happen, people need something much better to heal themselves. Each other's company, getting drunk, laughing, basically forgetting about the monster in the streets for a moment, and thinking of the love in our homes. Ralph rubbed the back of his neck. I get what you're saying. He took a sip of his beer. But how can we just ignore it? I said, forget it for a moment. Dozens of men are currently out there. Paul pointed at the window. 2 men with rifles patrolled the streets in the distance. Enjoy this little moment you have. He smiled. Ralph smiled back. You're right. A loud thud made him spill half of his beer. What? The 2 friends turned around. The songs and laughter stopped. 2 men faced each other amongst the crowd of seated people. One towered over the other and had his sleeves pulled back. I saw you. I saw your eyes. The other man was much skinnier and looked nervous. No, you're making a big mistake. He had yellow eyes. He's the monster. A few others stood up and approached them. I heard it can turn into a man, a whisper came from the crowd. If it were to choose, we're all dead. More people surrounded the skinny man. No, don't do this. Ralph walked up to the tall, aggressive man. You're drunk. Relax. This is the 3rd guy you've accused. Look, we're all friends here. The ones who had gotten up looked at each other and sat back down. The tall man grabbed Ralph by the collar. And you've protected each one. Which side are you on? He punched him in the nose, sending him a step back. Ralph punched back, and things quickly escalated to a fight. A group of men sighed and stood up. Come back when you learn some manners. Both men flew out of the bar and fell into the mud. Ralph mumbled something under his nose as he got up. You got us kicked out, you gib face. Finally realizing his mistake, the aggressive man shook his head and walked away into the rain. Ralph ran his hand through his wet brown hair and leaned on the pub's wall. Hey, the skinny man walked out. Thanks for saving me. Yeah, that drunk had it coming. When they let you back in, I'll buy you a beer. I could really use one right now, Ralph laughed. Yeah, compensation. He scratched his chin. Haven't seen you around here before. Between me and you, I work for a nobleman. Due to the murders, he fled the city, left me without a job. Before Ralph could say another word, his eyes locked on the silhouette of a man. Half hidden behind one of the buildings, he watched them from an alley opposite the pub. Are you seeing that? The skinny man turned his head. See what? There was a man there. Ralph didn't move his eyes from the alley where the man had been. I think it's best to go inside. Together, they walked back in and sat next to Paul. Your nose is bleeding. You really have to stop getting into fights, he laughed. And who may you be? He turned to the skinny man. Ralph sat down. This is... what's your name? Uriah, and I'm sorry to say this, but I won't be buying you that beer. The skinny man checked his empty pockets. Before they could say another word, a deafening shout made the entire pub go quiet. Everyone slowly turned towards the windows. That sounded like the drunk, Ralph whispered. A few of the men, along with Paul, took their hats off. Show some respect. Everyone slowly returned to laughing and having a good time. A loud slam made all the patrons look at the center of the hall. A well-built man in an expensive attire had slammed a stool against the floor. He slowly got on top of it and towered above everyone. Enjoying our evening, are we? By no means allow the murderer to ruin your mood. His judgmental eyes moved across the crowd. "Who are you to judge us? Go back to your fancy manner, you pansy fistfuck," one of the poorly dressed men shouted. "I am not here to judge those who carry the city. I am here because I shan't let our brothers and sisters die." "Got a hero, have we?" another patron shouted. "Oh, I am no hero, good sir." His expression changed to a more serious tone. "Some of you volunteered to patrol the streets." "So we have. What's it to you?" "I am also a volunteer." Multiple people laughed when the man said those words. "And I am here to provide." His eyes moved to a specific patron. "My good sir." "Workhouse?" The patron nodded. "Wife and kids as well." The man on the stool looked at another patron. "Oh, all right, give me a second." The man on the stool looked at another patron, who nodded as well. "Well, I shan't prolong this. I possess the knowledge of capturing the murderer." The pub went quiet. He had everyone's attention. Neither the Force nor the nobles see offense as a possibility. The Force is on the urge of giving up, and the nobles cower in their little pieces of personal heaven. I say we stop being idle. I say we shouldn't tolerate the loss of our brothers and sisters. He got off the stool and extended his hand. "I have resources. Greatly rewarded with coin and fame will be those who choose to join me. You shall be armed, fed, and sheltered." Paul walked up to him. "And what would our duties be?" "To join me. To join me in the woods, where we hunt down the murderer." "When?" "In 3 days." Everyone's faces became even paler than they already were. Paul licked his lips. "The moon will be full in 3 days, if the rumors are true." "As I said, I know how, but I can't do it alone." People traded glances. "I give each and every one of you my word. If you follow my instructions, all of us will return as heroes." Ralph walked up, extended his arm, and placed his palm above the man's hand. "You're the first noble I've seen to come here. I'll join you." Paul silently watched him for a few seconds, before extending his hand as well. "I accept your offer." Uriah nervously approached. Without making eye contact, he placed his palm on theirs. "I haven't eaten in a while," he whispered. 2 other men joined in. The noble gave the rest of the pub a disappointed look. His eyes moved back to the men. "You are all brave. Tomorrow we meet at noon." He passed each of them enough money for a warm meal and then disappeared into the crowd. 3 days had passed. Our hunting party camped outside the woods, waiting for the moon to rise. Aside from myself and Paul, 3 others were present. Uriah, the man I saved from the drunk at the pub, Cole, one of the 2 volunteers, and the noble who was paying us. The second volunteer never showed. The noble had introduced himself as Sir Gideon. None of us really knew if what he talked of was real. One thing was for sure, though. He believed it was. He vaguely explained that some monk had told him what the killer was and where to find him. His personal scholars gathered information afterwards, which confirmed the monk's story. This noble, supposedly being the only person to know all of this, aroused suspicion among us, but he was wealthy and paid as well. Everyone knew the pattern. A few months ago, the murders had begun. Each night, a person would be gruesomely stabbed to death, and once a month, when the moon was full, multiple people would be brutally mutilated. People said they'd heard howls at night, that they'd seen it. It was rumored the murderer was cursed for his sins, and now takes the shape of a wolf each full moon. Sir Gideon firmly believed in those rumors. He told us of how he tracked the murderer for weeks. Human footprints led into these very woods, and wolf paws on the same path led towards the city. The transformation took time, and the murderer needed a secluded, safe area. The people who weren't hiding in their houses were guarding the city. No one would come here at night. He armed each of us with a torch, a dagger, a musket, and a flintlock pistol. We were given pouches with special ammunition, but aside from the noble and Cole, none of us had much experience with hunting. While there was still light, and it wasn't raining, the weather was cold, so we had a small fire. Cole had his eyes on me as we ate. "So, Ralph, do you have family?" "Isn't that something you ask when you might die?" I slowly chewed the side of a carrot. If the killer were to take the form of a beast, he's said to have mutilated entire patrols on a full moon. A scent hound calmly waited in between Cole's feet. "The patrols didn't have this special ammunition. It should take it down." I looked at Gideon. "It should, right?" He nodded with a smile. "I have given you all my word. I have not forgotten. Follow the instructions and all of us will live." From when we'd met him, the noble had repeated multiple times how all of us are to speak as if he is one of us. It felt strange, though, to eat and talk together. "Brothers, are we well rested and prepared?" All of us awkwardly nodded. The sun had almost entirely disappeared. "Then we shall begin." Gideon stood up. He was the only one of us who carried a sword. "Follow my lead." All of us lit our torches and made our way towards the woods. Even though the forest became denser as we walked, the leafless trees made it easier to see. Cole took a deep breath. "The wind is moving in our direction. Good." The scent hound constantly sniffed. "If we are not alone in these woods, Eva will know." He held the short leash tightly. Uriah waved his torch around in all directions as if something would sneak up on him. "Sir Gideon, the woods are vast. How do we know where to search?" "Oh, the moon still has not risen. The killer is currently a mere man. He isn't capable of moving any faster than us. He cannot be far from the city." The scent hound began to bark and pulled Cole forward. "She found something." Torch in one hand, dog leash in the other, he led the group through the forest. Traversing the woods had become extremely difficult. The danger of slamming into a tree, falling down a pit, or just tripping made running a bad choice. We hastily maneuvered around the multiple obstacles nature threw at us. Myself and Uriah drew our pistols when Cole warned us we were close. We emerged from the trees and found ourselves in a small forest clearing with a stone well in the center. The scent hound stood on its hind legs and leaned its paws on the well. Cole carefully peeked into the darkness. "Be it the killer or something else, there is a man down this well." He calmed his dog and took a step back. "So the killer lives in a well?" I inspected what seemed to be a perfectly normal well. Gideon dropped his torch in it. The ball of light illuminated the dark, dry interior as it landed at the bottom. From our point of view, we could see an entrance, which led to an underground tunnel. Paul moved his hand across the stone surface. "Why would there be a well here?" Two glowing dots flashed in the dark tunnel, beyond the light of the torch. "There's something down there," I shouted. Everyone, including the hound, bundled up around the well. "I saw it. I saw its eyes. Did you see it?" From all the men, only Uriah nodded. "I saw it too. Something was watching us." Paul scratched his beard. "It must be some kind of animal. Either it fell down and got stuck, or there's another entrance somewhere close." Cole let out a sigh. "There's a man down there. Eva's nose doesn't lie. Also, I haven't heard a single animal since we entered the woods." Gideon leaned against the well and crossed his arms. He thought for a moment before looking at us. "You shall lower me down the well." I put my palm against my face. "Are you insane? We have no idea what's down there, nor do we know how big the tunnel is." Paul put his hand on the noble's shoulder. "I'm coming with you." I don't know how, but in less than 3 minutes, Paul convinced all of us he knew what he was doing. Uriah and I held a long rope at the top, the bottom of which hung in the well. Uriah's hands were shaking. "Oh, are you sure you can do this?" The noble nodded and cautiously crawled into the well. We watched as he slowly climbed down. "Good evening." A calm voice came from our back. Everyone instantly turned around. 10 meters from us, half sticking out of the trees, a young woman in torn rags watched us. "Oh, how did your mutt not smell her?" I whispered to Cole. The girl extended her hand towards us. "It's so cold out here. Thank you for bringing fire." Her whisper was barely audible. "Who's up there?" Sir Gideon's voice echoed from the well. "A young woman," I yelled back. Paul smiled and took a step forward. "Are you lost?" We could see him holding his pistol behind his back. "Do you know what this well is?" The moment he approached her, she hid deeper behind the trees. We could now only see half of her face. "We can get you home. We won't hurt you." Paul holstered his pistol. Something pulled on the rope with great strength. A few rocks cracked where the rope turned, slamming me and Uriah against the wall. The rope painfully slid through our palms. We heard Gideon fall. The only thing we could see was something pulling the noble deep into the darkness. He let out a pain-filled yell, but shortly went quiet. We couldn't see him anymore. "Gideon!" I shouted. The rope was gone, so going after him wasn't an option. Now that he'd stopped yelling, we could hear Paul yelling. By this point our necks were tired from constantly turning from one problem to another. The young woman was trying to pull Paul into the forest. Dagger in hand, he slashed her multiple times, attempting to free himself from her grip. Cole shouted and dropped the leash. All calmness left the scent hound's eyes as it bolted towards the attacker. It tackled the woman down to the ground, freeing Paul, who instantly joined us. The dog dragged her out of the woods. Cole shouted again. It calmed down and ran back to his side. Now that we could see her up close, something was terribly wrong about this woman. The wounds left from Paul's dagger and Cole's hound didn't bleed. Cuts, gashes, and holes in her body revealed black muscle. She blinked and locked eyes with me. "You said you'd get me home," she whispered as she slowly stood up. Uriah dropped his torch and aimed his musket. The moment we saw what he was doing, all of us jumped back and held our palms against our ears. If there were others in the woods, the deafening shot let them know exactly where we were. Uriah waved his hand to clear the cloud of smoke around him. "Why would you do that?" Cole shouted as he moved his palms away from the scent hound's ears. The shot had launched the woman a meter back. She laid on her back without moving. The gaping hole in her forehead emitted steam. "You murdered someone, I think." I looked at her closely. She was already dead. Uriah was going through the slow process of reloading his firearm. "I recognized her. She's one of the murder victims." "Where do you know her from?" "A brothel." We looked closely and saw that, aside from the new wound she had gained, her body was covered in scars. A long one across her throat stood out the most. I looked around. not knowing what I was searching for. Oh, what now? Don't know about you, mate, but I'm going home. Cole tried to clear his ears with his pinky finger. Paul looked at the well. We can't just leave him. I'm staying. He might still be alive. I grabbed him by the shoulders. Paul, it's too late. Our best chance is to go back and gather more people. We should... Go back. A voice similar to the woman's whisper came from the woods. We turned to see the drunk from the pub. He wore rags and had scars all over his body. Let's go back. It's cold here. He watched us from behind the trees. So very cold. Mother, where are you? A second figure slowly crawled out, this time a young boy. Cold. Why did you leave me? A fat woman emerged from the woods. Cold. More silhouettes could be seen in between the branches. I frowned and looked at Cole. If we're not alone in these woods, ever will know. I mockingly imitated him. We stood next to the well in the center of the clearing. The undead murder victim slowly walked towards us. We lifted our torches and nervously looked for an escape route. Cole calmed down for a second. Hey, wait. Why are we running? It's a miracle these people are still alive. Shouldn't we get them back to their loved ones? The fat woman opened her mouth, revealing her teeth, all of which were razor sharp. Give me your warm, she whispered. We broke into a sprint. I could see Cole lift his dog with both hands and run a random direction. Uriah let out a girlish scream, dropped his musket and fled as well. Paul and I tried to find the way we'd come from. While the victims were many in numbers, they were slow. If we kept calm, maneuvering around them wouldn't be too difficult. Whatever these people were, they became fewer as we moved away from the clearing. I think they're gone. We looked to all of our sides. It was an entire miracle we hadn't hit a tree or tripped on a rock. Once I was calm enough, I smiled and faced Paul. I guess Gideon didn't follow his own instructions. The man died, trying to stop a murderer. Show some respect. Yeah, sorry, you're right. Paul's eyes widened. What's wrong? I asked. He grabbed me by the collar and pulled me towards him. One of the victims had snuck up from behind me. It sunk its sharp teeth into Paul's shoulder. He yelled and stabbed the creature's eye with his dagger. Blade still in its head, it collapsed. Paul, are you all right? Oh, definitely more painful than a dog bite. He put his palm over the wound. I tore off a piece of my sleeve and bandaged my friend. Oh, Paul, you saved me. He'll buy me a beer when we return to the pub. Come on, keep moving. We kept on walking through the woods. Do you think Cole and Uriah are alive? I didn't look at Paul when I asked this question. We can only hope. We should have stayed together. I think they should be able to handle themselves. Besides, the worst has passed. The clouds in the night sky tore apart, revealing the full moon. Our torches were no longer needed as the moonlight lit up the forest. For a moment, we stopped and stared into each other's eyes. A few seconds passed, and then we continued walking. I smiled. At least Gideon was wrong about the rumors. Rumors? Yeah, the ones he told us about the killer. How some believe he can take the form of... Ear-piercing screams of pain sounded from the direction of the forest clearing. I looked at my torch. Paul, the torches will only give away our location. With the moonlight, we don't need them. I hurled my torch into the woods. Ralph, no. Paul shouted. The dry branches quickly caught fire. God, a forest fire will also give out our location. I grabbed his torch out of his hands and hurled it in the woods as well. Oh, God. Well, let's hope this slows him down. Before Paul could say another word, the screaming had stopped, and that's when we heard it. The uncanny howl of a monster. A monster which was most likely heading towards the city to kill. We moved as fast as possible, hoping we could escape in time. When we get out of the woods, we're still quite a distance from the city, I nervously whispered. Paul looked back at me and the rapidly growing forest fire. If we get out. The trees became fewer, and soon we exited the woods and found ourselves out in the open. The few city lights in the distance gave us hope. The only obstacle in our way was a vast field with no hiding spots. So we bolted. Ralph, wait up. We hadn't even passed half the distance when Paul slowed down. I turned around. Come on, we're almost there. Almost there. Maybe for you. I'm not as fast as I used to be. Go. I'll catch you up at the pub. Remember, you still owe me a beer. Paul, I'm not leaving you. We're getting out of here together. Ralph, I haven't been feeling too well the last few months. It's been getting worse. Pains in my chest. I don't know how long I have, even if I reach the city. You're telling me this now? I shouted. You had enough troubles. Do this for me, please. Just go. I looked back at the forest fire. Burning silhouettes of the murder victims were emerging from the woods. Paul smiled and nodded. Promise me you'll come back to the pub. His smile faded. He didn't answer. I kissed him on the forehead, smiled, spat to the side, and ran towards the city. I never looked back.
Over the river and through the woods. Oh, my little one, what big eyes you have, the witch in the crimson red hood said as she tenderly caressed the cheek of my infant son in her arms. It might have been a touching sight, were she not standing over the savagely mutilated corpse of my wife. From where I laid grievously injured on the dirt cabin floor, I tried to plead with the witch, who wore the face of a young girl, to take whatever she wanted, even kill me if it pleased her, as long as she spared my son. She paid me no mind, though, didn't seem to notice me at all. She seemed to be off in her own world, completely detached from the atrocities she had just committed upon my family. Oh, I just know that Grandma is going to love you, she cooed, as she carefully placed my only son in the wicker basket she carried at her side, and covered him in a blue wool blanket. She then cast me a backward glance with her deep maroon-colored eyes as I struggled to crawl towards her, despite the deep wound she'd inflicted on me with her dark magic. She took only a moment to laugh at my suffering before turning and walking out the front cabin door into the blistering cold winter night with my son at her side, and then vanishing between the trees like a shadow. Well, if I'd been anyone else, my story might have ended here. The pain I felt was excruciating. I could barely feel my limbs. My vision blurred, and every breath I took was shallow and labored. I've no doubt that if I'd been a normal human being, I would have succumbed to the agony and expired on that dirt cabin floor. I think the witch had been counting on that. What she didn't count on was that I was no normal human being. I had a weapon that most humans did not. Summoning the last reserves of my strength, I crawled along the dirt floor slowly as blood seeped from my wounds until I finally made it through the open cabin door and into the pale silver glow of the moonlight that awaited me outside. Moonlight had always been the bane of my existence. It was the reason I could never have a life in civilized society. Why I chose a life of seclusion from my family out in these woods, where I thought we would be safe. Yes, moonlight had always been my curse. But now, in my greatest time of need, I saw that the moonlight was my only weapon in the fight to save my boy from the evil that had snatched him from me. And so for the first time in my life, I embraced it. The full moon shone against the black sky with unbridled brilliance that night. So the change came quickly. I felt my bones snapping and stretching as my body became larger, and my muscles expanded to nearly 3 times their normal size. Sharp, carnivore's teeth grew out from under my regular ones, pushing them out of my gums and causing me to spit them out into the snow, along with thick droplets of my blood. My fingers grew long, as wicked-looking claws sprouted out from where my fingernails had been, and my raven black hair became thicker and thicker, until it was a mane of jet-black fur that covered the entirety of my body. I felt the wounds across my body shrink and close as the pain melted away with the transformation. Before I knew it, the man I was had completely disappeared, replaced by the wolf, and tonight that suited me just fine. For I knew that where the man had failed to protect his family, the wolf would not. It's difficult to describe what it's like to inhabit the form of a wolf. I was myself, and at the same time, someone else altogether. My human thoughts were intact, but they were quiet whispers compared to the primal cries of my animal instincts, specifically the ones that commanded me to track, hunt, and kill. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a disaster, but these were not normal circumstances. Tonight, I needed to hunt, and there was no doubt in my mind that by this hunt's end, there'd be plenty of killing to satisfy the wolf. The witch's scent still hung thickly in the frigid winter air like a miasma. It smelled like lavender, incredibly distinct but fading fast. I had to move quickly to catch up with her. I bounded after that lavender scent through the dark, unforgiving forest with wild abandon, the mournful howls of the other wolves that roamed the forest filling my ears as I went. They might not have seen me, but they knew I was on the hunt. They always did. The first time I caught up with the witch was on the banks of the river that divided the northern part of the woods from the south. She'd stopped, seemingly to pick flowers from a nearby bush that grew along the water's edge, despite the harsh winter cold. She had the most carefree look on her face as she brought the flowers to her nose and inhaled their scent. She looked like a young woman on a joyful evening stroll, rather than the murderer and kidnapper that she was. And even in my half-mad state of transformation, it infuriated me. The wicker basket that held my son lay beside her in the snow, where she knelt, and the wolf's keen ears could make out his steady breathing and the rhythm of his tiny heartbeat. Tipped me over the edge from fury into frenzy, and with one of the most savage, hate-filled growls I've ever given, I abandoned all caution and lunged at the witch with the sole intention of sinking my fangs into her throat and tearing her head from her body. But that had been a mistake. She turned and saw me at the last second, utter shock and fear painting her features very briefly before she evaporated into a cloud of red mist, taking my son with her and leaving me to claw at snow and branches. I looked around for her frantically, terrified that I'd lost her, when I saw her materialize on the opposite side of the river. Thankfully, whatever sorcery she'd employed to turn herself into mist didn't seem to be able to carry her very far. She gawked at me from across the river for a moment, before that look of confident amusement that she'd had in my cabin spread back across her face. I rose to my full height and howled at her, if for no other reason than to show her that she would not get away with her crimes, that tonight she would face bloody retribution. She laughed at me mockingly before taking a deep breath and exhaling a huge black cloud of what I thought was smoke at first, before it drifted towards me over the water with rapid speed as the buzz of 1,000 angry black hornets reached my ears.
The swarm attacked me with vicious ferocity, each sting burning like hot fire. I swatted and clawed at them as best I could, but they evaded my claws with ease. Seeing no other option, I dove into the freezing waters of the river to avoid the swarm, catching a glimpse of the witch fleeing into the woods beyond the river as I did. I allowed myself to drift downstream long enough for the swarm to dissipate before I swam ashore. Had I been in my human form, I might have chastised myself for being so careless at such a critical moment. But the wolf had no mind for such things. The wolf only had a mind for hunting, and the witch's scent was still strong. She seemed to be moving away at a much quicker pace now, which came as no surprise because now she knew she was being hunted, and though she apparently moved much faster than most people, she wasn't fast enough to get me off her trail. I pursued her scent doggedly through the dark woods for hours before she slowed down long enough for me to catch sight of her in that crimson cloak of hers again. This time she seemed to be in the company of someone else. He was a woodsman by the look of him, big and burly with a thick red beard hanging from his chin, and he carried a sharp-looking axe at his side. He sat on a stump across from a campfire, with a concerned look on his face, while he spoke to the red-hooded witch, who clutched the basket holding my son close to her breast. I went low as I approached the campsite, determined not to make the same mistake I had at the river. This time I would be quiet until it was time to strike. I moved in slowly and silently until I was close enough to make out the words they spoke to each other. "Calm down, my dear. There's no need to cry. What do you mean, a beast?" A stream of crocodile tears flowed down the witch's face as she replied. "A wolf, fur as black as night and fangs like razors. It's following me through the forest. It wants to devour my baby," she cried. Oh, I understood her game immediately, and it made my blood boil. How dare she claim my son as her own, when his real mother lay dead and rotting by her hands? Oh, I wanted to leap out and rip her apart, but I restrained myself and kept listening. "Why are you wandering the woods this late alone, dear? Where is the child's father?" he asked her. The witch let out a sharp sob at his question, as if it pained her to hear it. "The boy's father is a miserable lout who will have nothing to do with us. We only have my grandma," she wailed. Oh, it was quite the performance on her part. I could tell the woodsman was utterly convinced. "Where does your grandma live, dear? If it's not far, I can travel with you until we get there, if it makes you feel safe." The witch cleared her throat. "She lives in a cottage at the forest's edge. I swear it isn't far." "Then let's get going. You and the little one stay close to me," he said, standing up. "Oh, are you sure? The wolf is so big and frightening." She asked him in a tone that sounded genuinely scared. "I haven't met a wolf yet that I couldn't put down with this," he said as he brandished his axe, letting the moonlight reflect off its silver edge. "Oh, thank you so much," she said as she put my son down long enough to wrap the woodsman in an embrace that was more than a bit provocative. Now this was a problem. I didn't doubt that I could take on the hapless woodsman if I needed to, but I wasn't in the habit of hurting innocent people, and I couldn't risk the witch making another escape while I was distracted with him. That silver axe he carried could do me serious harm as well, so attacking outright seemed to be out of the question. For the moment, at least, the witch seemed to have outsmarted me, and as hard as it was, I restrained myself from obeying my instincts and came up with a plan. It dawned on me fairly quickly that, though this witch was out of my reach for the moment, her grandmother, surely a witch herself, was not. Or if I could get to the cottage before them, I could dispose of the grandmother. That way I would both eliminate whatever threat to my son she posed, and also attain the perfect point of ambush to save my boy when they arrived. That would mean I'd have to find a cottage, though, and, at the edge of the forest, wasn't much to go on. I had my nose, though, and since it was safe to assume that the two witches lived together, If I could find a scent like hers and follow it to its source, I would find their lair. After putting some distance between myself, the woodsman and the witch, I put my nose to the air and searched for a scent to follow. It didn't take me long to find it once I started heading south. The scent was like lavender, unmistakable. I followed it through the thinning tree line for what felt like an eternity before I came upon the cottage. It was innocent looking enough from a distance. Just a single-story little wooden house with some potted plants scattered about on the porch, and what, at first, I thought were people gathered in the front yard. Once I got closer, though, the house took on a much more eerie appearance. Skins and hides from various animals like foxes, bears, cats, boars, and even wolves hung all around the house, some attached to the building itself, others stretched over straw-filled scarecrows that filled the yard. It looked as if a pack of beast-like men stood guard over the house, and the human part of me found that deeply ironic. Handmade charms that appeared to have been made from the bones of small animals hung over the front doorway, and once I was close enough, I could hear the chanting. It sounded low and wicked, spoken in a language I did not recognize. The voice chanting sounded like that of an old woman, the witch's mysterious grandmother, I guessed. It might have scared a human, but I was not human, and after everything that had happened to me tonight, I was ready to spill blood. In my haste, I hardly noticed how the hollow eye sockets of the scarecrow seemed to follow me as I approached. I didn't care. I burst through the front door and braced myself for a battle, but was met with only the steady crackling sound of a fire. What I saw within the cottage sickened me more than anything I'd seen outside. Strange runes drawn in blood covered the walls, and bones littered the otherwise bare floor. Tiny bones. They were unmistakable as the bones of small children. There were hundreds of them. Some were intact, woven into some kind of handmade dolls or charms, not unlike the ones outside. Others had been broken open with a crude hammer and had the marrow scooped out of them for purposes I couldn't even begin to imagine. At the very back of the cottage, a fire burned within some kind of large bronze bowl that looked like the remnants of another age. A decrepit old woman clothed in the skin and fur of a large wolf sat on a chair in front of the bowl. She chanted over the fire, her pale and cloudy eyes focused on the bones that burned within the bowl's center. She spoke in a raspy, hoarse voice that made my skin crawl. "There you are, monster," she said with a smile. "Your coming was foretold by the bones." Oh, I did not want to hear her speak. I stepped forward to rip the old hag apart, but she spoke as I approached nevertheless, laughing as she did. "My death will be a hollow victory for you, monster. You'll never hold that boy again," she said in between her fits of maniacal laughter. I didn't let her say another word. After all I'd gone through with the red-hooded witch, I expected this one to put up a fight, but she didn't. She sat perfectly still as I wrapped my claws around her throat and broke her neck, stopping her dreadful laughter for good. Now all that remained was to ambush the red-hooded witch and her hapless protector and save my son. I stuffed the witch's corpse in a cupboard I found in her bedchamber to the left of the main parlour where she'd been sitting, and took her place on the chair. Waiting in that den of evil was torture. I waited until I started to see the first signs of dawn in the sky through the window outside. I was starting to worry that the moonlight would fade, and I'd lose the blessing of the wolf before they arrived, when I finally heard the familiar flutter of that crimson cloak, and the innocent-sounding voice of my most hated enemy outside. "Grandma! Grandma, I'm home, and you'll just love what I brought for you." I forced myself to remain still in that chair as she walked through the door with the woodsman in tow. He seemed different somehow, The concerned look that painted his face at the campsite was gone, replaced with a distant and vacant expression, as if he were unaware of anything happening around him at all. I suspected that the witch had done something to him between there and here. I expected her to attack as soon as she saw me, but to my utter amazement, with only the dim light from the fire illuminating the cottage, she seemed unable to tell the difference between me and the fur-wrapped old woman she'd been expecting, at least for the moment. I said nothing as she approached. "Grandma?" she asked as she came closer with growing concern in her voice. Oh, she was close now, but I needed her to get just a little closer. "Is something the matter?" she asked, stepping in close. Then, for the first time that night, my son started crying from where he lay in the wicker basket she carried. The sound caused her to take her eyes off me for only a moment, and I took the opportunity to sink my teeth into her throat. The metallic taste of warm blood coated my lips as I bit down hard, determined to kill that red-hooded harpy once and for all. Her face was twisted in a mixture of shock and agony, and I could make out the gurgling sound she made as air escaped her lungs. She crumpled to the ground as I grabbed the wicker basket from her hands. Never in my life have I handled anything with such care in the form of the wolf as I did that basket. My son's cries had become all the more hysterical, but I didn't care. The fact that I had him in my arms again after all that had transpired tonight made all of it worth it. Well, the woodsman seemed to have snapped out of whatever trance the witch had placed over him, because he stared at everything before him with his mouth open in horror, as if he was seeing it for the first time. "Lord above," he started to say before going pale as something behind me caught his attention. Before I could turn to see what it was, a sharp, stabbing pain shot up my back as long, pitch-black claws pierced through my side. My, Grandma, what sharp teeth you have," said the witch, her voice now distorted and demonic. I turned my head to see her, more than just alive, but seemingly undergoing a transformation of her own. Her once maroon eyes now burned ruby red. Her fair skin had turned grey, and her hair began to writhe and twist beneath that hood of hers, as if it were alive. Black blood seeped from the wound on her neck that I'd given her, and maggots poured from her open mouth as she spoke. Without thinking, I began pummeling the witch with my free claw as a cold numbness began to spread throughout my body. No matter how much I struck her, no matter how much flesh I raked off her face with my claws, she did not let go. She pulled the claw she had lodged in my side upward, cutting into my stomach and chest. The pain was unbearable. As my eyesight grew dark, I could see the witch reaching for the basket with one of her wicked black claws, before I saw the silver head of an axe planted squarely in her skull, and the voice of the woodsman, which sounded in equal parts terrified and brave. He was swinging at her wildly in a state of panic, and the sight made me grateful that, at least for the moment, he seemed much more terrified of her than of me. The witch screamed out in agony, sputtering out half-formed threats and curses at the both of us as we worked in unison to destroy her. As the first rays of dawn streamed in through the window, she finally went still. For a brief moment, I feared the woodsman might turn his axe on me, but he stood transfixed, staring at me as the form of the wolf began to fall away with the rising sun. I felt myself shrinking as I clutched the wicker basket and made my way over to the chair where that horrible witch had been sitting when I'd first come to the cottage. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me as I realized I'd proven her wrong. Despite the undoubtedly fatal wounds that had been inflicted on me, I was holding my son in my arms once again. When my human hands had returned to me, I reached into the basket and gently pulled him into my arms and pulled the blanket from his face. Big, beautiful brown eyes looked up at me in recognition, and his hysterical cries faded away. He smiled and reached for me with his tiny little hands. I'd never seen anything more precious. "What are you?" The woodsman had finally got up the courage to ask in a timid voice. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I just gestured to the baby in my arms and gave the most desperate plea I had ever given in my life. "He's my son. Please, when I'm gone, take him away from this awful place," I choked out. For a long time, he said nothing, just looked between me and my son in total silence, before he nodded reassuringly. "I understand." No other words were spoken between us. I may have lost my life tonight, but I'd saved my boy from whatever horrible fate the witches had planned for him, and that was enough for me. I cradled him in my arms, listening to the warm, soothing rhythm of his heartbeat as numbness spread over me. And when death finally came to embrace me, I met it without regret.
So a bit of a mixture there, a couple of new stories and a couple of old classics mixed in as well, all around that same theme. Always an intriguing theme if you ask me. One of my favourite locations for a horror story, in the forest. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that little Sunday evening collection. Just thought it was really fitting for, well, in the Northern Hemisphere, we're coming towards the end of summer, even though it's insanely hot here today. Mid 30 degrees Celsius, absolutely roasting. So I've been sitting in my office here recording. I hope you appreciate the suffering I've gone through. Well, first world problems, what are you going to do? Anyway, my dear friends, that's it for this evening. I will be back again tomorrow evening with something brand new. Till then, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.